Welcome back to Keep It Real Boxing. This is Cypher Box. Okay, so let's talk about James Degale versus Chris Eubank Jr. February 23rd, 02, ITV Box Office. Look, this is a grudge match, you know, a domestic rivalry that's been brewing for some time. It's been brewing for years with these guys, right? This beef started years ago from alleged sparring wars or sessions of sparring where there's conflicting stories. You know, Eubank said he schooled Dagale. And Dagale got so angry he threw him and his father out of the gym, and then Dagale kind of turns around and says that it was the other way around. But listen, they've been going back and forth with each other, trading words over social media, etc. for God knows how many years now, and now they're finally going to get to settle it in the ring on February 23rd. James Degale has dubbed this fight as the retirement fight. He says the loser will have to retire because they'll have nowhere else to go. He himself has said, if I lose to Chris Eubank Jr., you know, what can I do from that point on? You know, he said it himself. He said, I would have to retire because if I can't beat Chris Eubank Jr., there's no point me carrying on with my career. He believes it's the same for Eubank, even though Eubank's turned around and said that, you know, it's not going to be the end for me. And I'm not even thinking about retirement or those words. And that thought has not even come into my mind because I'm going to beat you. Two different mindsets there. But James Degale's reply to that was that I'm a realist. I know if I can't beat this guy, then there's no point me continuing my career. It's over. Yeah, if I can't beat Chris Eubank Jr. So he's dubbed it the retirement fight. Do I agree? I think for James Degale, yeah. I think for James Degale, he's at the tail end of his career now. He's only got a few more fights left in him. At this point, he's going to be looking to, you know, he's talked about he's made smart investments with his money, so he's created longevity for his money in terms of finances after boxing. But surely, you know, at this point, a fighter, Jenny, you know, of course he wants to prove himself still at this point. He's still also thinking about the money. He wants those final paydays, yeah? And yeah, I do agree with James Degale. I think, you know, where does James Degale go if he loses to Chris Eubank Jr.? Because if you look at it, his last performance was, I think, a 3 or 4 rounder on a PBC undercard, which wasn't televised. I think it was more of a little tune-up fight, just to feel out his injuries and stuff like that. His 2 fights before that were against Caleb Turex, you know, which weren't the best performances we've seen from James Degale, let's be honest. Okay, so yeah, I definitely believe he's at the tail end of his career and he needs a performance here against Chris Eubank Jr. So I don't disagree with him. For Chris Eubank Jr., I don't know, is this the end for him? Could he have still go away and rebuild? You know, he lost to Groves, 2 fights ago in that World Boxing Super Series. So I don't know. I don't quite know whether that still applies to Eubank Jr. I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see. If he gets beat really bad, then yeah, potentially. Degale obviously vacated his IBF title to make this fight. He was ordered to fight Uzcategui, who was recently just beaten by Caleb Plant. Personally, I think he ducked Uzcategui. You know, it wasn't just a case of him having to vacate the title because he wanted to fight Chris Eubank Jr. To be honest with you, when I've watched Uzcategui, you know, in some of his fights, he brings that same approach that Caleb Turex does, and I don't think James Degale wanted any more of that, to be honest with you. And if it was a high risk, low reward fight for him, and he saw that from a business point of view, and you know, in order to be able to have a few more fights before he retires to pick up a few more checks, he decided to kind of swerve that one, in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion. You know, Turex won. James Degale, he had that shoulder injury. You know, he wasn't able to utilize his jab. Turex 2, he claims he had an Achilles injury, which didn't enable him to move around the ring and use movement in the ring for that fight. But I don't think his shoulder had fully healed up, even by Turex 2. Says he was overtraining. He's been overtraining now for years. He says now he's restructured his training regime. He's training smarter rather than harder. And he says he wants to prove himself to the doubters and prove the doubters wrong. Look, I do rate James Degale, yeah. I think James Degale has had a brilliant career. He has. He's done really well. Yeah, if you go back as far as his loss to George Groves, right? When they were both just still coming up at that time, domestic European level. When he lost to Groves, he went all the way back down the ladder again. The guy was fighting on Channel 5, I remember, fighting out of leisure centres, and he had to build his way back up the ladder, climb all the way up the ladder again, and reach the heights of winning world titles, having, fights at the elite level, world level, fighting in America, road warrior, doing it on the road. Do you know what I mean? So I do rate James, but in the last couple of fights, if I'm honest with you, the Truex fight, that jab was non-existent, and it cost him. And he got beat in that fight, and he got beat, and fair and square, Truex definitely won that first fight. The second fight, I also felt Truex won. I don't think he won that second fight, to be honest with you. I think he was lucky to get the decision. Again, even though he's talking about his Achilles heel, his jab wasn't really there either. And Truex did what he did in the first fight, in my opinion, and he got the win. But the judges saw it the other way. So I think he was kind of lucky to get that second decision against Caleb Truex, personally. Yeah, on the basis of those two fights, and coming off the Bellew Jack fight, which he took it was a hard fight, and he took a beating in that fight. I mean, you could say that James Degale, at the tail end of his career, and yes, is he shot? Is James Degale shot? Can he handle the physicality of the sport anymore? And I understand as fighters get upset when they hear that from fans and boxing fans. Don't get me wrong, I understand that. But you also have to look at it that people are making these comments and coming up with these analyses based on your performances. And in those last two fights against Truex, he looked shot. But we'll have to wait and see. He's saying that his injuries have now fully healed up. What was it? The right shoulder, his jab hand is not an issue anymore. His Achilles is not an issue anymore. He says he feels fine. His injuries are fine. But like I said, it's one thing doing it in training. It's one thing doing it in sparring. It's when you're in a competitive fight on fight night against, a game opponent. That's when, the true story will come out. And we'll find that out on the night of February 23rd, whether James Degale still got it or not. Right, let's move on to Chris Eubank Jr. Alright, so we know Chris Eubank Jr. is coming off a really bad loss from George Groves in the World Boxing Super Series semi-final. He's had a tune-up fight since then, obviously, and that was on the undercard of another World Boxing Super Series show. Definitely got exposed against Groves, got exposed badly, let's be honest. We learnt some things about Chris Eubank Jr. that the boxing fundamentals are, aren't quite there. His inability to close distance, to gauge range, simply weren't there. Stated though, most his career, he's been training himself. It says Ronnie Davis and his father have helped and advised along the way, but they have not been consistently there. He's learnt from the Groves fight that at this level, at the elite world level, he needs a trainer. He's hired Nate Vasquez from the Mayweather Boxing Club. Now, I don't know too much about Nate Vasquez. I have seen him on the Mayweather Boxing channel because, Jeff Mayweather, when he does, I love that channel because Jeff Mayweather makes me laugh. But he's done, where he does his interviews and he says, what's your prediction and stuff like that. And I've seen Nate Vasquez give his opinion. That's all I know of Nate Vasquez. I don't know anything else about him. He's been with Nate Vasquez, his new trainer, for about 6 months. So the last fight, I just saw an interview today. The last fight against Dagale, he said that they were kind of training on and off for that fight because Chris Eubank didn't know whether he was going to be on the card or wasn't going to be on the card. So it wasn't a full training camp. But Chris Eubank has also said that, as he always does in all his predictions for all his fights, he's saying he's going to KO James Degale. Look, Eubank, in my opinion, has never reached his full potential. He's wasted a lot of years, and if he has been training himself majority of his career, that's not great for him. That explains a lot of things when it comes to him. It explains why he got exposed against George Groves. You know, don't get me wrong. When it came to that fight against George Groves, the one thing you could say about Eubank is the guy's got heart. Yeah, I don't think anyone can really sit there and question the man's heart. He has heart. Yeah, he's got heart. He's got guts. Yeah, he'll keep going to the very end. He's one of those guys I feel you need to, I'm sorry to say this, like, you know, he literally has that look in his eyes as to say, you're going to have to kill me to beat me, kind of thing. You know, he's hungry, you know, and he always wants to prove he's better than his opponent and he can beat his opponent and he's the best out there and stuff like that. But in order to do that, you know, you've got to know how to box. You got to know, look, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to knock. It's impressive what he's done. You know, if he's been training himself mostly throughout his career, then it's impressive what he's done to date. Let's be honest. Yeah, but at the same time, do you know what I mean? He's wasted a lot of time doing that as well, and that's a lot of his arrogance, and I think his pride and his ego's got in the way of that. But the one thing I will never question about the man is his heart, because you saw the state of him in that George Groves fight. He was battered from pillar to post. You know, his face was a mess. You know, and in all fairness, you know, on that night he struggled with the basic boxing fundamentals. You know, like closing distance, gauging range, like I spoke about earlier on, when the only thing he had to really do was use a jab. You know, use a jab to gauge the range, to gauge the distance. Do you know what I mean? You know, you also use your lead foot as well for that too, by the way, you know, which I'll go into a little bit later on. But, you know, if that basic understanding wasn't there, then there's quite clearly something that, you know, that isn't right with his career and what's going on in his team, in his corner, his father, Ronnie Davis, etc. You know, the setup's not right. So he's got himself Nate Vasquez from the Mayweather Boxing Club. And it's quite funny, I saw an interview with Nate Vasquez today. And he was asked, and it's on Boxing Social, so go and check it out. And he was asked, you know, like, when you first started, something like, when you first started with James Degale, what did you say to him? And he told Chris Eubank Jr. something he's probably never heard before, which was honesty. And he told him straight up, he said, your footwork's shit, your defense is shit, so that's where we need to start first. He said Chris Eubank Jr. was telling him where he feels he's short and what he feels he needs to work on. And he turned around and said that, replied to Chris Eubank Jr. with that, by telling him his footwork and his defense was shit and we need to start there. And then the reporter turned around and said, well, knowing Chris Eubank Jr., you probably wouldn't have liked that. What did he say to you in return? He goes, he didn't say anything to me. Because it's probably the first time he's ever heard that, he said, in his career, that no one's ever told him that. He goes, listen, I'm not going to be one of those trainers. If I think something's not right, I'm going to tell you. He said, if I feel like you're losing the fight in the corner, I'm going to tell you you're losing the fight. And you know what? I think that's what Chris Eubank Jr. needs. He needs a trainer that's going to tell him that, but he has to be willing to listen. Now, so far, Nate Vasquez is saying that Chris Eubank Jr. has been listening to him. But we'll see on fight night whether he listens to him, because that's where it's really going to matter. You know? And to be fair, this is probably a fight that Chris Eubank Jr. has to win. I don't think it necessarily ends his career. He could keep fighting, but it does make it more difficult for him to get to that promised land of that elite level, world level boxing that he wants to be, you know, he wants to be on. So it is a crucial fight for Eubank Jr. as well, no matter what he says. Okay, so let's look at the fight itself a little bit. For Dagale, that jab is key. It's a key tool to his style of boxing. Yeah, if you look at the Caleb Truax 1 fight, you know, his jab was non-existent. He was uncomfortable with it, and that allowed Truax to get in on the inside, close the distance, and rough him up. Push him up against the ropes, trap him in the corners, let off combinations. He was not able to keep Truax off him. And he's going to have to do the same with Eubank Jr. because Eubank Jr. likes to fight from mid to close range. So he's going to have to keep a distance between him and Eubank, right? Kind of like Groves did as well. Just keep him at bay, you know, and work off the combinations and let off those combinations and that movement. It all comes off that jab. It's key to James Degale's success in the ring. If you go and look at his fights over the past, you know, when he leading up to world title fights, when he won the world title, that jab has always been key for him. Yeah. So he needs to be able to establish that in the fight. He needs to be able to use that consistently throughout the fight, and work off that jab. Yeah, and that will, that's the kind of thing that's going to help him keep that distance he needs between him and Eubank, and keeping Eubank at a distance and making his aggression ineffective. Because if he doesn't do that, if he isn't able to establish his jab against Eubank, or the shoulder hasn't quite healed up, or the injury comes back, or whatever the issue, whatever you want to call it, yeah, that's going to allow Eubank to get in close where he wants to be, where he's comfortable, where he's most effective and dangerous. And remember, he does carry power, Eubank. So, James doesn't want that kind of night. He doesn't want that to happen. So that jab is key. The other thing that worries me about James Degale, which we've seen in the past with him, is that the middle rounds. If you look at some of his fights, like against Andre Dirrell, for example, the middle rounds, it feels like he takes those middle rounds off. Now, I don't know whether that's down to stamina and conditioning. Remember, he talked a lot about, like I said, he's been talking a lot about he's been overtraining. Now, will his new training regime, from his strength and conditioning training and his boxing training, will that, help him during those middle rounds when he starts to feel maybe a little bit gassed or a little bit tired? Remember, he's at a certain age. He's had tough fights as well. He's had some tough fights. If you look at it, the Bellew Jack fight was a really tough fight. Physically, that was a tough fight. That took a lot out of him. Yeah, then he had a fight with Caleb Turax, the first one. That was a very physical fight. Yeah, a tough fight. The Caleb Turax second fight, again, a very physical fight, a tough fight for him. How much has that taken out of him? How much wear and tear has that added to his body? Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how James looks in those middle rounds, and even the latter rounds now, because he's hit a certain age. In the past, I've seen that, like, if you use that Andre Dirrell fight, for example, the earlier rounds, James Degale's fine. He's winning them clearly. The middle rounds, he's like, he takes them off, or he takes his foot off the pedal. And then the latter rounds, he turns it back on again. Can he still box like that? Can he still pull out performances like that and still get a win? I don't know. But if he starts taking the middle rounds off, or he starts taking his foot off the gas, etc., or he starts feeling the pace in the middle rounds, that's going to play into Eubank's hands. And that's something he doesn't want. Now, Chris Eubank Jr. showed against Groves that he struggles to gauge and measure range and distance, and I saw a Paulie Malignaggi interview recently, and the one thing he said, which I agree, I said that after the fight as well, directly after the fight, that all he needed to do was use the jab to gauge that distance, to gauge that range, because that's what the jab's there for. It's a measuring tool to create distance, to create range, to work out your opponent. That's what the jab's there for, to probe. You use it there to probe. Yeah, you can use it as a power punch if you want as well, but it's mainly there to kind of keep your opponent at bay, measure the distance between your opponent, between you and your opponent, and also help. It's there to help you close distance. So you use that jab and then step in. Do you know what I mean? So I agree with what Paulie Malignaggi said in that interview recently. So he couldn't close the distance. He likes to fight mid to close range, which means he needs to establish a jab to do that, because he's got to start from the outside and then work his way in. Once he gets mid to close range, that's when he's at his most dangerous, because he likes to throw those combination body shots, head shots, and he likes to do it from short range. That's where he's most effective. But he needs to use a jab. He needs to establish a jab. And we've heard what Nate Vasquez thinks of his footwork and his defense, his capabilities. Those need to get better as well. Hit and not get hit. Don't just stand there and, allow your opponent. Don't let James Degale, tee off combinations on you and move out of the way. He needs to close the ring off as well. And he needs to use that jab to close the ring off as well. So he can measure the range and distance and then trap. He's going to want to trap James Degale in the corners and on the ropes, because that's where James Degale doesn't want to be. Yeah, although James Degale works on the outside, one thing he doesn't want to do is get himself pinned down and trapped on the ropes. But, I'm sure they'll be looking a lot at the last two fights against Caleb Turax to kind of learn a few things about James Degale, so they could take advantage of any weaknesses he may have, or he may have at this stage in his career that have developed through injuries and stuff like that. I get a feeling listening to Nate Vasquez a lot as well that he's banking on, kind of like how Tony Bellew was banking on David Haye's injuries coming into play that he sustained during his career. And I get the feeling that Nate Vasquez is also kind of thinking, well, we'll see how those injuries hold up when he's in a competitive fight, when it's in the ring. Do you get what I mean? So I think they're kind of banking on James Degale's body letting him down and failing him, kind of like David Haye did against Tony Bellew in their 2 fights. So their strategy is probably around that a lot as well, where they're going to try and apply pressure on him, force Degale to fight in places where he doesn't want to fight, force him to go where he doesn't want to go. Do you know what I mean? Make it really physical and uncomfortable for James Degale and really test his body and see, have those injuries actually healed up? You know? Are they a concern of the past and they're not a problem here going on, you know, going to be a problem on February 23rd? I think they're banking on James Degale's body failing him on the night, personally. But definitely, you know, Eubank definitely needs to establish that jab. And, he's going to need that to get himself in close, mid to close range where he's at his most effective and his most dangerous. The other thing I've noticed about Eubank Jr. is that at times he lacks composure and accuracy with his punches. If you go back and see the George Groves fight, you know, there were times where he got George up against the ropes, in the corners, and George was smart, you know, experienced enough to know that, this is where I don't want to be, I'm going to hold, and he'll start holding and spoiling. But when Chris Eubank would free himself up and start throwing punches, he would throw wild punches. He would miss those punches, you know, wildly, you know, because he lacked that composure, and he was smothering his own work as well. He's got this habit of smothering his own work. Sometimes you need to take that half step, that full step back, and then tee off the shots. You know, keep when you got your opponent on the ropes and in the corner, you need to give yourself that little bit of room. So even though he likes to fight mid to close range, he still struggles to understand that he needs to give himself that little bit of room, that little half step back, to be able to connect with his punches, to be able to be accurate with his punches. And that comes from composure and experience as well. And you know what? That also comes from good, strong boxing fundamentals. So that's something his trainer's going to have to work on as well. You know, that composure, that understanding of, I need to take a half step back so I can tee off my shots and land them accurately. You know, there was a lot of that with the George Groves fight. It was just messy, you know. To be fair, most of the times in those situations, when Eubank steps up to the elite level, he's more of a brawler when he fights. We know that. Yeah, but he needs to be a composed boxer on the night if he wants to beat James Degale. If that makes sense. Remember, Eubank's only been with his trainer for 6 months. You know, in those 6 months, or it's probably about 7 or 8 months now when you think, because I think they started in June, July with each other. You know, what has he rectified these issues? You know, in that time, has he learned and mastered these boxing fundamentals that he's been lacking for so long throughout his career? You know, is Nate Vasquez banking a little bit too much on James Degale fading in the latter rounds due to his injuries and his body, thinking that his body's going to fail him? You know, I don't know. Has James Degale fully healed from those injuries? You know, can James Degale's body take the physicalities of the sport anymore? You know, these are all questions that need to be answered. And although I would naturally pick James Degale to win this fight, yeah, and not by a knockout, by a decision, I'm finding it hard to pick James Degale. And I'm not saying I'm picking Chris Eubank Jr. either. The reason, if I gave the edge, if I felt like, if you put a shotgun to my head and said, Cypher, pick a winner, who's going to win this fight? I would probably pick James Degale. But there are questions in my mind about James Degale that need to be answered. That's why I feel like if those questions cannot be answered on a night by James Degale, then it could be a Eubank night. Simply because James Degale, the wear and tear to his body over a hard career, have finally got the best of him. And that's the only way I see Eubank winning the fight. But if James Degale can prove he's still got it, that he's still got a little juice left in the tank, then you know what? It'll be a James Degale night. Look, we're gonna have to wait till fight night. I think it's an intriguing fight. I'm gonna enjoy it. I'm not particularly happy that it's on pay-per-view. Don't get me wrong. You're gonna have to pay pay-per-view prices for this one. I don't really agree with it, to be honest with you. I think it's just a normal TV fight personally, but they're putting it on ITV Box Office, and that's probably down to James Degale's demand in terms of money. I'm sure it's the same when it comes to Eubank Jr. Eubank Jr. signed a 3-fight deal with PBC as well. So, you know, sometimes these fights that we're seeing now that we don't class as pay-per-view fights are down to the fact that the demands of the fighters are so much that the only way they can pay those fighters that kind of money is by making it pay-per-view. But it is getting a bit out of hand, the whole pay-per-view things here in the UK. It's like every month or every couple of months, sometimes twice in a month, that we've got pay-per-views going on. You know, they're starting to probably exploit the boxing fan a little bit, I feel. But you can always stream it illegally, of course, if you don't want to pay for it. I'm sure most of you will. But look, end of the day, that's my views on the whole James Degale versus Chris Eubank Jr. on February 23rd. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a good fight, hopefully. As always, guys, you know, leave your comments. Please leave, clean comments. You know, follow the rules. I have got blocked words in place, so no foul language, no racist terminology. You know, otherwise it will just drop into my spam box and I will delete it. Yeah, and if the comment's really bad, I'll block you from the channel. As always, guys, like, share and subscribe. This is Cypherbox reminding you to keep it real.